I was tidying up my husband's truck and found a tube of personal gel in the center console. I didn't make a sound. I just went inside and replaced the contents with powerful construction adhesive. And what unfolded next had our entire block calling for paramedics. I'm so happy you're here to listen. If you're enjoying this, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see how far my little story of payback has gone. I was sitting at the breakfast nook. The quiet in our home was as heavy as a winter blanket. A quiet that had moved in and made itself comfortable over the past few months. The grandfather clock in the hall, a present from my own dear father, chimed away with a steady, judgmental tick-tock. Every sound was a sharp poke, a reminder of the life I was starting to fear was nothing more than an elaborate, well-kept secret. My husband, Richard, had just gotten home from another one of his late-night client meetings. He didn't just look tired, he looked burdened, like a man carrying a secret that was weighing him down to his bones. His face was a roadmap of stress and dishonesty, with new lines around his eyes that I'd never seen before. He threw his coat over the back of a chair with a sigh that seemed a little too dramatic, tugged at his tie like it was choking him, and fell into bed with a groan from the mattress, not even stopping to wash his face. The usual scent of his aftershave was in the air, but it was tangled up with something else. A strange, sweet perfume that felt like a trespasser. A silent confession of a second life I knew nothing about. A few moments later, his soft snoring filled the room. A sound that used to be a comfort, but now felt like he was mocking me, singing a lullaby to the fool he thought he'd married. I stood up, moving with the quiet efficiency of a woman who's been a wife for 40 years, and started to pick up the things he'd left scattered around. His coat, his keys, his phone, his briefcase. The phone's screen was still lit up, showing a new text message that glowed like a bad omen. I furrowed my brow. Richard was terrible with texts. He always said, "Margaret, these things are too fiddly, I'll just call them." But there it was, a text, right out in the open. A digital whisper from a life he was living behind my back. Driven by a grim curiosity that felt both wrong and absolutely necessary, I picked it up. The message was brief, just a few words that would send cracks through my entire world. "Tonight was perfect, boss." It was followed by a little winking emoji, a playful sign that felt like a dagger in my own heart. I froze, feeling like I'd been struck. The screen was a cruel mirror showing me a truth I was too scared to face. Boss. The word spun in my head. Who on earth would be calling him that? And with such a familiar, flirty tone? I scrolled up, my thumb shaking, hoping to find more context. But there was nothing else. Just a strange number I didn't recognize. A shiver went down my spine, not from the cold, but from a deep, chilling dread. It was like a draft seeping into my life, revealing a hidden room I never knew was there. I glanced toward the bedroom and saw Richard roll over, letting out a little snore. He looked so peaceful, which was a harsh and infuriating contrast to the hurricane that was starting to build inside of me. My heart was beating like a drum, a fast, guilty rhythm. I quickly placed the phone back down, my hands trembling so badly I almost fumbled it. I went on with my tidying, my motions now stiff and automatic. I started gathering his clothes from the day to put in the laundry basket. As I checked the pockets of his trousers, my fingers closed around a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a high-end restaurant over in Aspen, dated for that very evening. I frowned. Aspen? He told me he was meeting clients down in Boulder. A small, humorless laugh escaped me. Richard couldn't stand the drive to Boulder. Aspen, however, was where his younger sister lived before she moved to Florida. He had many happy memories there, a detail he brought up often. But who was he having dinner with in Aspen while telling me he was in Boulder? The receipt was for 2 people. A bottle of expensive Pinot Noir, the same wine he'd bought for our 15th anniversary, a wine I cherished, and 2 entrees, steak and salmon. I tried to recall the last time Richard had taken me somewhere so fancy. It must have been a decade ago for the grand opening of my first bookstore. That memory was crystal clear in my mind. The soft candlelight, the proud look on his face, the way he raised his glass to my success. Now that memory felt tainted, a faded picture in an album full of lies. I pulled out my own phone and, with a silent, steely resolve, I took a picture of the receipt and the text message. I didn't want to accept it, but a woman's intuition, a wife of 40 years' intuition, is a powerful thing. Something was terribly wrong, and I was going to find out what it was. My hands were shaking, not just with rage, but with a profound fear. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, about to watch my entire life crumble into the canyon below. I walked out to the garage. Richard's big pickup truck was still warm, the air thick with the smell of exhaust, and that cloying, sweet perfume from his clothes. I opened the passenger door, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I clicked on my phone's flashlight and began to scan every inch of the interior. There was nothing unusual on the driver's side, just a few coins and a half-empty bottle of water. But when I reached over to open the center console, my fingers brushed against a small, smooth tube. I pulled it out, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a half-used tube of personal lubricant, with a bit of residue on the cap. A sticky, undeniable piece of evidence. I just stood there in the quiet garage, staring at it. It was the physical proof of my worst fears. Richard and I hadn't been intimate like that in a long, long time. He always claimed he was too tired, that getting older had taken away his energy. So who was this for? The question hammered at my mind, each word a blow against the life I thought I had. I felt frozen, but some deep survival instinct took over. I put the tube back exactly where I found it. I wiped my hands on an old rag, scrubbing them as if the betrayal might stain my skin. I kept looking, more slowly now, more deliberately. Tucked under the passenger seat, I found a couple of wadded-up tissues, saturated with that same floral perfume. It wasn't my scent, which was a soft, simple lavender. This was loud and intrusive, a screaming announcement of his infidelity in the sanctuary of our home. I took pictures of everything, the tube, the tissues, as if the camera could capture the truth. I shut the truck door and went back into the house, the weight of what I'd found pressing down on me, heavier than any box of books I'd ever unpacked. I sat down at the breakfast nook, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold my phone. I was almost certain now. He was cheating. I went through his messages, but they were all about work, dry and professional. His text history was clean, except for that one odd message. I checked his deleted items, his drafts. Nothing. It was all too tidy, too perfect. Suspiciously so, as if he had scrubbed away every last trace of his deceit. A master of deception, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. My anger was now a cold, hard knot in my stomach, and a new, more determined feeling began to take its place. A need for the truth, a need to bring the lies into the light, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I was already up, moving like a ghost through my own home. The images of the lubricant, the Aspen receipt, and that flirty text message were spinning in my mind, a toxic merry-go-round of doubt. I stood in the kitchen, my hands on autopilot, my mind racing. I made a simple breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and a cup of the dark roast coffee Richard loved. I hadn't slept a wink. Richard came downstairs looking exhausted, his hair uncombed and his eyes still puffy with sleep. He sat down, picked up his mug, took one sip, and put it down. "I've got a big presentation today," he said, his voice gravelly, a line he'd used 100 times before, never looking me in the eye. "I'll probably be home late again." He's so good at this, I thought. The easy lies, the casual delivery. It made my skin crawl. I just nodded and forced a smile, even though I wanted to scream, "Where's the presentation? Who is it with? In Aspen again?" But I kept my mouth shut, letting my anger simmer beneath the surface. "Okay, drive safe," was all I said. He stood up, gave me a quick pat on the arm, a gesture that felt more like a formality than affection, and walked out the door. The door clicked shut, leaving the kitchen silent, leaving me with a suspicion that was rapidly hardening into a terrible certainty. I cleared the table and washed the dishes, the simple routine a small comfort in the storm of my thoughts. I couldn't just sit here and drive myself crazy with theories. I needed proof. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Mrs. Gable, an old friend who had been a great help when I was first getting my bookstores off the ground. She had once mentioned a good private investigator who handled cases of infidelity. "Margaret, if you ever find yourself needing him, I have Frank's number," she'd said. "He's very professional and discreet." I never imagined I'd be the one making that call, but I had no other choice. I dialed her number, my voice unsteady, each ring of the phone echoing my growing anxiety. "Hello, Mrs. Gable? Can you help me get in touch with Frank? I need his help." There was a brief silence on the other end, a pause that told me she understood everything before she replied. "Margaret, what's wrong? Did Richard do something?" I let out a long breath, not wanting to share the sordid details, my pride already wounded. "I just need to know the truth. Can you help me?" Mrs. Gable, a woman who understood more than she said, agreed without hesitation. An hour later, I got a text from Frank, asking to meet me at a small coffee shop downtown that afternoon. "Mrs. Davenport, please don't you worry. I'll help you find out what's going on," he wrote. The message was simple, but it was a lifeline in an ocean of deceit. At noon, I walked into the coffee shop. It was a cozy place with mismatched wooden chairs and the rich smell of coffee beans in the air, a smell that normally brought me comfort but now felt out of place. I picked a table in the corner where I wouldn't be noticed, a shadow in a sunlit room. Frank came in, a man in his 50s, unassuming, with a kind face and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through everything. I passed him a small USB drive containing the pictures I'd taken, the text message, the restaurant receipt from Aspen, the lubricant, and the tissues. "This is everything I have," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know for sure, but I think my husband is having an affair." Saying the words out loud made them feel real, and they tasted like poison. Frank nodded, looking through the images on a small tablet, his expression unreadable, a professional mask. He jotted down notes in a little spiral notebook. "Mrs. Davenport, I understand. I'll begin surveillance on Mr. Davenport this evening. You just try not to worry. I'll be in touch as soon as I have something." I looked at him, fighting back the tears that were stinging my eyes. "Thank you," I said softly. "I just want the truth, no matter how much it hurts." Frank gave me a compassionate look, a glimmer of empathy in his eyes. "I'll do my best. You go home and try to act as normal as possible." I left the coffee shop and walked back through the busy streets. But I felt a loneliness that was deeper than any I'd ever known. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime we had built on a foundation of trust that was now turning to dust beneath my feet. I had always believed in Richard. I thought he was a good man, a family man, someone who would stand by me no matter what. He was my rock. And now, I was hiring a stranger to spy on my own husband. The bitter irony of it all was hard to swallow. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, the main character in a tragic story I never wanted to be a part of. That evening, as I sat in the office of my main bookstore, surrounded by the comforting smell of old paper and ink, my phone buzzed. A text from Frank. I opened it, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a photo of Richard, wearing the blue polo shirt he loved, walking into a fancy restaurant, holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in on the picture, and my world stopped turning. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a slinky red dress and had on heavy makeup, with bright red lipstick and her long hair flowing down her back. They didn't look like a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. They looked like a couple out for a romantic evening. Their bodies were angled toward each other, an unspoken secret hanging between them. I leaned back in my chair, the phone trembling in my hand. Chloe? How could this be possible? At family dinners, she and Richard always seemed so awkward around each other, barely making eye contact. I realized now it had all been a performance, a carefully staged act for my benefit. Frank sent more photos. In one, they were seated at a quiet table in the back, a single candle flickering between them. Chloe was leaning in close, smiling, and Richard was raising his wineglass to hers with a look of pure tenderness on his face. Seeing that picture sent a sharp pain through my chest. In 40 years, he had never once looked at me like that. Not even when we were young. Not even when I was that girl from Boulder with bright eyes and a hopeful smile. He used to look at me with such adoration, a love I thought was only for me. Now, that look belonged to her. In the middle of the night, a video file arrived from Frank. The clock on my desk read 2 a.m. I put in my earbuds, trying to keep the secret contained, and pressed play. My hands so unsteady I almost dropped the phone. In the video, Chloe leaned over and whispered something in Richard's ear that made him laugh. A deep, hearty laugh I hadn't heard in years. Her voice was syrupy sweet, her eyes glinting in the low light. Then they stood up to leave, and Richard, the perfect gentleman, held the car door open for her as if she were a queen and he was her devoted subject. I watched the video over and over, a form of self-torture. Each replay was another twist of the knife. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into our family and treated like my own daughter, the one I had taught how to make my grandmother's famous apple pie, and Richard, the man I had dedicated my life to, the man I had built a family with. What were they doing? What about my son, Michael? The questions were a tidal wave, and I was drowning. I saved every photo and the video to the USB drive, noting every detail, the date, the time, the name of the restaurant. My hands moved on their own, but my mind was a maelstrom of shock and betrayal. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe Richard and Chloe could be so cruel, so deceitful. But the proof was right there in front of me, a mountain of it, impossible to deny. I spent the night in the bookstore, surrounded by stories of love and adventure, but feeling like my own story was ending in tragedy. I remembered the early days of the business, when Richard would help me shelve books, when we would laugh together in this very office, our dreams stretching out before us. Now, it all felt like a distant, beautiful lie I had been living for far too long. The next morning, I was in the small break room of the bookstore, going over a stack of orders for a big hotel downtown. The smell of books and coffee, which usually calmed my nerves, felt empty that day, offering no comfort. As I finished signing off on an invoice, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my apron, my stomach clenching when I saw it was a message from the investigator. It was a single short sentence. "Mrs. Davenport, I am sending you more evidence." I took a deep breath, trying to brace myself, but my hands were shaking as I opened the message. A series of new photos loaded onto the screen. The first one showed Richard, in his work clothes, coming out of a lawyer's office downtown. At his side was Chloe, wearing a professional-looking skirt and blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, and wearing a pair of enormous sunglasses that hid half her face. A pathetic attempt to go unnoticed. They were walking shoulder to shoulder, not like family, but like partners. The next photo showed them standing outside a boutique hotel, one of those fancy places with a valet out front. I zoomed in, desperately searching for any detail that would contradict what I was seeing. But there was nothing. They looked so at ease, so comfortable with each other, part of a secret world that I was excluded from. Then came a short video clip from Frank. I pressed play, and my heart hammered so hard against my ribs I thought it might break through. The video was taken from a distance, but it was clear enough to see Richard and Chloe standing on the balcony of a hotel room on the second floor. His arm was wrapped around her waist, and she had her head resting on his shoulder. And then, like a physical blow, I saw them share a quick, brazen kiss. It was short, but it was enough to extinguish the last tiny ember of hope I had been clinging to. I replayed the video, dissecting it frame by frame, each image a fresh wound. The curtain in the room moved, and Chloe stepped out, a happy, carefree smile on her face as she wrapped her arms around Richard. She looked like a young woman completely in love. I collapsed into my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. Frank's next text read, "They've rented the room for the afternoon. Looks like they might be staying the night. I'll maintain surveillance." I read the message again and again, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. Just a few hours before, Richard had texted me, "Margaret, won't be home for dinner. Have to meet with an out-of-state investor. Get some rest." His tone was so sweet, so considerate, just like it always was. But now I knew it was all a performance. A carefully crafted lie. An out-of-state investor. He wasn't out of state. He was right here, in a fancy hotel with our son's wife. I opened my laptop and carefully transferred every photo and every video to the USB drive. Each time I clicked save, I stared at the images, making sure I wasn't in some horrible dream. In the video, the way Richard looked at Chloe was so tender. The way he gently touched her hair reminded me of how he used to touch mine more than 30 years ago. We were young, and I believed our love was forever. A promise made under a clear Colorado sky. Now, seeing this, all I felt was the sting of betrayal. I thought back to all our family get-togethers, all of us sitting around the dining table, the perfect picture of a happy family. Chloe always kept her distance from Richard. She would even give him dirty looks sometimes. Michael used to joke about it. "Mom, I don't think Chloe can stand Dad. She avoids him like he's got the flu." And I believed it. I just thought they had personalities that clashed. But now I knew it was all an act, a meticulously planned deception. They were incredible actors, in front of me, in front of Michael, in front of everyone. I felt like such a fool, a blind, trusting wife, betrayed by two people right under my nose. People outside were going about their days, completely unaware of what was happening on that hotel balcony. But Frank had captured it all, a silent hunter delivering the brutal truth. I texted him back. "Thank you. Please keep watching. I need to know everything." He replied simply, "I will. Stay strong." That night, I returned to the house that Richard and I had shared for decades. It felt cold and unfamiliar now, a stage for ghosts and lies. I opened my dresser drawer and pulled out a large manila envelope, my hands moving with a grim sense of purpose. I printed out all the evidence, the photos of them at the lawyer's office, the pictures of them checking into the hotel, the screenshots from the video of them on the balcony. I arranged them in chronological order, sealed the envelope, and tucked it away at the bottom of the drawer, beneath old family albums. I paused on a photo of the four of us, Richard, Chloe, Michael, and me, at Michael's last birthday. Chloe was smiling, hugging Michael tightly. Richard stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, looking like a proud father. Looking at it now, I wanted to tear it into a million pieces, to erase their smiling, deceitful faces from my life forever. The next morning, just as it was getting light, I heard the front door creak open. Richard stumbled in, reeking of whiskey. "That investor was a tough one, Margaret," he slurred, his eyes bloodshot. "Had to have a few drinks. I'm wiped out." I was in the kitchen, holding a glass of water, watching his pathetic performance. It felt like he was pouring salt on an open wound. "Go get some rest," I said, my voice as calm and steady as always, the practiced voice of a wife. "You have to work tomorrow." He nodded, gave me his usual pat on the shoulder, and shuffled off to the bedroom. A few minutes later, he was snoring, as if he hadn't just spent the night with our daughter-in-law. Once I was sure he was sound asleep, my phone buzzed. It was a call from the investigator, Frank. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Mrs. Davenport, I managed to record their conversation in the hotel parking garage. I have special equipment, They had no idea. I'm sending you the file now. My heart was pounding, but I just said, "Thank you, Frank. Send it." A moment later, an audio file appeared in my messages. I put in my earbuds, sat down at the table, and hit play. The first voice I heard was Chloe's, cold and greedy, a voice I didn't recognize. "Richard, you need to hurry up with that phony contract. I want that bookstore chain. I want that old bat out of the picture for good." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. Then came Richard's voice, deep and smug. "Don't you worry about the paperwork. Margaret doesn't suspect a thing. Just leave it to me. She trusts me completely." It was like a knife twisting in my chest. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to steal everything I had built from the ground up. The bookstores, all the sweat, the long hours, the sleepless nights, stocking every shelf, driving all over the state to meet with suppliers to build my reputation. It was all mine. Richard had never lifted a finger to help in the stores. He'd never worked the register or negotiated a lease. And now he and Chloe wanted to take it all. To throw me out of the house I had turned into a home. I almost broke down, but I managed to stay composed enough to copy the audio file to the USB drive with the rest of the evidence. I carefully noted down the time and place, as if the small act of organization could keep me from falling apart. The next morning, as I was brewing coffee in the bookstore's break room, my phone buzzed again. Frank had sent another batch of photos, taken with a long-range lens. In them, Richard and Chloe were sitting in his truck with a thick stack of documents spread across the dashboard. Chloe was holding a pen, marking up the papers, looking focused. Richard was next to her, nodding and smiling in agreement. Frank's text read, "I overheard a bit more. They're planning to use a contact at the county clerk's office to push the transfer through. I'm looking into it." I zoomed in on the photo. I could see the official-looking letterhead on the papers, but the text was too blurry to read. But I knew what they were. They were planning to steal my life's work, piece by piece. I sat there, surrounded by the sweet smell of books, but I felt like my world was caving in. I opened the audio file again, put my earbuds in, and listened to their words, their venomous plans. That old bat. That's what Chloe had called me. I remembered when she first came into our family. I taught her how to bake. I hugged her and treated her like a daughter. I thought she was the woman who would build a future with Michael. And Richard, the boy I fell in love with back in Boulder, the man who promised to grow old with me. They had turned me into a joke, a fool who still believed in things like love and loyalty. A regular customer came in, Mrs. Gable, who always bought mystery novels for her book club. "Margaret, the store has been so busy lately. Your little empire is growing. I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice full of warmth. I forced a smile. "Thank you. I'm trying my best." But inside, I was crumbling. I wondered what she would think if she knew the truth. Would she see me as a strong woman, or just a fool who was being played by her husband and daughter-in-law? I bagged Mrs. Gable's books, waved goodbye as she left, and then sank into my chair, my head in my hands. I wanted to weep, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a cold, quiet rage began to build inside me, like a fire in a furnace, ready to burn everything down. That night at the dinner table, I sat across from Richard. The dim kitchen light cast strange shadows on his face. He ate his meal and talked about his day in a flat, boring voice, as if nothing was wrong, as if his world wasn't about to be turned upside down. "Margaret, I've got some important contracts to sign this week. Maybe you should take a look. It's all very complex." I picked at my food, pretending to eat, but all I could hear was Chloe's voice on the recording. "Hurry up with that phony contract." I knew he was testing me. He wanted to see if I would fall into his trap. I gave him a tired smile, the perfect imitation of a wife who was too exhausted to care. "Yes, I'll look at them tomorrow. I'm just so tired tonight." He nodded, took a long drink of his wine, and looked at me as if everything was perfectly normal. But I knew that behind that calm expression was a man who was ready to ruin me, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Richard had a few more glasses of wine. His face got flushed and he started slurring his words, rambling on about a difficult client. I nodded along, pretending to listen. But on the inside, I was screaming, "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" When he finally staggered up from the table and went to the bedroom, I cleared the dishes, my movements slow and deliberate, trying to contain the fury that was boiling inside me. He collapsed onto the bed, snoring loudly, and left his truck keys on the nightstand. They glinted in the lamplight, a silent invitation to my revenge. I stared at them, my heart pounding. This was it. This was my chance. I crept into the bedroom, careful not to make a sound. Each step felt like a journey between my past pain and my new, uncertain future. I snatched the keys, my hand closing around them tightly, and went straight to the garage. The night was still and quiet. All I could hear was the chirping of crickets, the soundtrack to my cold fury. I turned on my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness and landing on Richard's truck, a silent witness to his betrayal. I opened the door. The smell of gasoline and that sickly sweet perfume hit me again. I opened the center console, and there it was. The tube of lubricant, the cap loose, residue dried on the side. A monument to their affair. I held it in my hand, feeling like I was holding a vial of poison. It was obvious they had used it again. It was just more confirmation of their sick little game. I took the tube into the kitchen, set it on the counter, and washed my hands with strong dish soap. I scrubbed and scrubbed, as if I could wash away the filth of their betrayal. The clean scent didn't calm me, but it helped me focus. I opened a utility drawer and pulled out a tube of clear, industrial-strength adhesive, the kind I used for repairs at the bookstores. It was a tool of my trade, and now it was a weapon for my revenge. I carefully squeezed the contents of the lubricant tube into the sink and then began to fill it with the adhesive, drop by drop, until it was full. I wiped the tip clean, shook it a little to settle the contents, and squeezed a tiny bit out. It came out smooth and clear, just like the original gel. No one would ever know the difference just by looking at it. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. This was the first step toward justice. I went back to the garage, placed the tube back in the console, and arranged everything just as it had been. Before I closed the door, I decided to check the trunk. Inside, there were just some old grocery bags, a toolbox, and an unopened condom wrapper tucked into a corner. My heart lurched, but I wasn't surprised anymore. I took a picture with my phone, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. Each photo was another nail in their coffin. Back inside, I put the keys back on the nightstand. I picked up a book and sat on the sofa, pretending to read. The lamplight shone on the pages, but the words were just a blur. My mind was racing. I thought about Michael, my sweet boy, who thought he had a happy marriage. How could I tell him that his wife and his own father were betraying him? I thought about my bookstores, 40 years of hard work, of dreams and determination. Richard had never really supported it, but I thought he was at least proud of me. Now I knew he was just waiting for the chance to steal it all away. About an hour later, Richard woke up and stumbled into the kitchen for a glass of water. He saw his keys on the counter and didn't think anything of it. "Still up, Margaret?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I smiled. "Yes, just finishing a chapter. Go back to bed." He nodded, drank his water, and went back to the bedroom, snoring again within minutes. I looked at his sleeping form, and it was like looking at a stranger. This man, who had promised me forever, was plotting my ruin. But he had no idea that I had already begun my counteroffensive. At dawn, I was up. The early morning light was just starting to filter through the bookstore window. I was in my element, kneading dough for the scones I sell at the coffee bar, channeling all my anger into the work of my hands. When I got home for breakfast, I made sure my face was calm and composed. Richard was already there with his coffee. I served him his eggs. "Richard," I said, my voice even, "I have to drive to Colorado Springs tomorrow to finalize a contract for a new location. I'll probably be back very late. Can you handle dinner?" I watched him from the corner of my eye. He looked up, surprised, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't concern. It was relief. "A new store?" he asked, reaching for my hand with fake tenderness. "Of course. Don't you worry about a thing. You go handle your business." But that little spark in his eye, that slight upward turn of his lips, it told me everything. He wanted me gone, and I knew exactly why. I smiled and nodded. "Thanks. I'll call if it gets too late." He finished his coffee, stood up, and said he had to get to the office. As he walked out, I saw he'd left his phone on the table. The screen lit up with a missed call. The contact name was CT. I frowned. My heart started to beat faster. Chloe Thompson. It had to be her. Before I could even think about picking it up, Richard rushed back in, grabbed the phone, and quickly turned off the screen. "Forgot this," he mumbled, flashing me a strained smile before disappearing out the door. I stood there staring at the closed door, feeling like I'd just been slapped. He wasn't even trying to be careful anymore. That day, I worked on autopilot, making calls, signing papers, greeting customers with a smile. But my mind was a whirlwind. I couldn't let them get away with this. I needed more. I needed to hear it from their own mouths. That night, I pretended to be exhausted. I went to bed early. "I have to get up at the crack of dawn for my drive," I told Richard. He nodded and gave me a pat. "Get some rest, Margaret. Be safe tomorrow." I lay down and closed my eyes, but my ears were wide open, listening to every sound. Around midnight, Richard's snoring stopped. I heard him slip out of bed. The dim light from his phone cut through the darkness. He tiptoed out of the room, thinking I was fast asleep. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding. Then, slowly, I got up and followed him. I hid behind the heavy curtains in the living room and watched him stand in the shadows by the window. He put the phone to his ear and whispered, "Yes, of course. Come to the house tomorrow. No need for hotels anymore. Margaret's leaving town for a business deal. She won't be back until late." I heard a soft laugh from the other end. Chloe's sickly sweet voice. "That's perfect, Richard. Finally, we can have some real time." Richard chuckled. "Yeah, come over in the morning. I'll be waiting." I stood there behind the curtain, my blood turning to ice. They were going to turn my home, my son's childhood home, into their love nest. I crept back to the bedroom, opened a drawer, and pulled out Michael's old digital recorder, the one he used for his college lectures. I checked the battery, put in a fresh one, and set it to continuous recording. I hid it on the bookshelf behind a row of books, right next to our bed, certain it would pick up everything. I tucked the wire behind the shelf and placed a framed photo in front of it. It was a picture of the four of us at Michael and Chloe's wedding. Looking at it made my stomach turn. Chloe's innocent smile, Richard's proud hug. It was all lies. Before getting back into bed, I double-checked that the recorder was on. Then I lay down, pretending to be asleep. Richard came back into the room, got into bed, and was snoring in minutes. But I was wide awake in the dark, my mind sharp and clear. I reached over and set my alarm for even earlier. I closed my eyes, but not to sleep. I was getting ready for the final act. I woke up at 5 in the morning. It was still dark outside, with just the pale glow of the streetlights filtering in. The house was completely silent, except for Richard's steady breathing from the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring at a skillet full of cooking oil on the stove. This was the last part of my plan. A simple smoke trap, but it would be enough to bring the truth to light. I tied a piece of thin, strong fishing line to the stove's ignition knob. I ran the line across the kitchen, out the slightly open window, and tied the other end to a heavy book on the porch railing. All I had to do was pull the book from a distance, and the stove would light, the oil would start to burn, and it would create a thick black smoke that would be impossible for the neighbors to ignore. I tested it once. The smoke billowed up instantly. I turned it off, checked everything again, and made sure there were no signs of tampering. I put on a coat, grabbed my large handbag, and made a show of leaving for my trip. Before I walked out, I went into the bedroom and gently shook Richard. "I'm leaving for the bus station now," I whispered. "I'll probably be home late." He mumbled from under the covers, "Okay, be careful, Margaret. Call me." Then he rolled over and went back to sleep. I looked at the man I had once loved more than anything, lying there, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over his head. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy, but my steps firm. Instead of going to the station, I walked across the street to Mrs. Gable's house. She opened the door, her face full of concern when she saw my handbag. "Margaret, what are you doing up so early? Is everything all right?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Mrs. Gable, can I stay here for a little while? I need to keep an eye on my house." She frowned, but she didn't ask any questions. She poured me a cup of coffee and gave me a chair with a clear view of my front door. From there, I could see everything. Around 10 o'clock, a car pulled up. Chloe got out, wearing a sundress and sunglasses, trying to be discreet. Richard opened the door, glanced around nervously, and hurried her inside. I gripped my coffee mug, my heart thudding in my chest. "It's time," I whispered. I pulled out my phone and opened the app that connected to the hidden recorder. The sound started coming through my earbuds. Chloe's laugh, the sound of glasses clinking, footsteps moving through the house. Then I heard Richard's voice. "See? No more sneaking around in hotels." Chloe giggled. "You sure know how to plan a party. The old bat is really gone?" I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, listening to her talk about me with such disgust. Then the sounds from the bedroom started, sounds I didn't want to hear. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Just a little longer, Margaret. Just a little longer." A few minutes passed, and then suddenly, I heard Chloe scream. "What is this? Oh my God, we're stuck!" Her voice was shrill with panic. Richard grunted, "Stop moving! Let me see what's wrong." I smiled. I swiped my finger across my phone screen, activating the remote trigger for the smoke trap. The string pulled taut. The stove clicked on. The oil in the skillet caught fire. Thick black smoke began to pour out of the kitchen window, a dark plume rising into the morning sky. Mrs. Gable gasped, "Margaret, your house is on fire!" I feigned shock, but inside, I felt a strange sense of calm. Neighbors started running out of their houses, pointing and yelling. "Someone call 911! The Davenport's house is on fire!" One of them, Mr. Harris, already had his phone out, calling the fire department. I stayed right where I was, my eyes glued to my house. Everything was happening exactly as I had planned. Through my earbuds, Chloe's voice was getting more hysterical. "Richard, do something! I can't move!" Richard's voice was a low growl. "I'm trying! Stop screaming!" But I knew they couldn't do anything. The industrial adhesive was doing its job, trapping them in the most humiliating way possible. I imagined their struggle, their panic, and a part of me felt a grim satisfaction. They had pushed me to this. They had tried to steal my business, my home, my dignity. Now, they were going to pay. The smoke kept billowing out, thicker and darker. The neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk, their voices a mix of fear and curiosity. "What's happening?" someone asked. "Where's Margaret?" "She went out of town on business," another replied. Mrs. Gable, standing beside me, gave me a long, searching look, but she didn't say a word. She just gently squeezed my arm. I knew she suspected something, but I didn't need to explain. The truth was about to come out for everyone to see. Less than 10 minutes later, The wail of a fire truck siren echoed down the street. The big red engine rounded the corner and screeched to a halt in front of my house. I saw Michael jump out of the passenger seat in his fire captain's uniform, his face etched with worry. My son. He shouted to his crew, "Get the hoses ready! We might have people inside!" I watched him, and a sharp pain shot through me. My son, who was so proud of his family, he was about to walk into a nightmare. I wanted to run to him, to hug him, and tell him I was sorry. But it was too late. I had to let it play out. The smoke from the kitchen was still pouring out, making it look like a serious fire. My son grabbed an axe and broke down the front door. The sound of splintering wood filled the air. His team followed him in with their equipment. I could hear the chaos from the bedroom through my earbuds, Richard's frantic shouts and Chloe's hysterical sobs. "Do something, Richard. It hurts." He just growled, "Shut up." They were trapped, helpless, just as I had planned. Michael burst into the bedroom, and I could only imagine the scene he found. His own father and his wife, naked and glued together, their faces a mask of pain and terror. I wasn't there, but I heard Michael's voice crack. "Dad? What is this?" A firefighter behind him gasped. "Oh my God." Another one let out a nervous laugh, but Michael immediately yelled, "Quiet." I knew that shout wasn't just for his crew. It was for him. A last-ditch effort to hold on to some semblance of control. The humiliation was complete, exposed not just to Michael, but to his entire team, and soon, the whole neighborhood. A firefighter ran out and reported to Michael, "Captain, the fire is out. It was just a grease fire on the stove. No real damage." But Michael didn't answer. I imagined he was still standing there, frozen in shock. The neighbors were creeping closer, crowding around the broken door, pointing and whispering. "What's going on?" "It's Richard and his daughter-in-law," a woman exclaimed. "Oh my goodness, how could they?" Mrs. Gable, standing next to me, had her phone out and was discreetly recording, zooming in on the bedroom window where you could see the flashing lights. She looked at me, her eyes full of a mixture of pity and anger. "Margaret, you knew," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just gave a small nod, my eyes still fixed on the scene. Michael finally came out of the bedroom, his boots heavy on the floor. I heard Richard yell, "Get everyone out of here! Close the door, Michael!" But it was too late. The whole street was watching. "Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught together," a man said loudly. "Can you believe it?" "Poor Margaret," another woman sighed. The firefighters, after a moment of stunned silence, had to do their job. They wrapped Richard and Chloe in sheets, trying to cover their conjoined bodies as they loaded them onto separate but connected stretchers. I could hear Chloe's broken sobs. "Please, just do something. I can't take the pain." Richard just kept muttering, "Don't let them see us." But everyone saw. There were looks of disgust, snickers, and disappointed shakes of the head. "What a disgrace!" someone shouted. "In his own son's bed." The ambulance pulled away, its siren wailing. Among the crowd, I heard bursts of laughter. "That's a story for the grandkids," Mr. Harris yelled. An old woman shook her head. Poor Margaret. I had walked over and was now standing among the crowd, pretending I had just rushed back from the bus station. Michael stood motionless on the lawn, his face as white as a sheet. His crew was quietly packing up their gear, avoiding his gaze. I knew Michael was reeling, not just from what he'd seen, but from the double betrayal by the two people he should have been able to trust the most. I wanted to go to him, but I held back, letting Mrs. Gable lead me to her car to drive me to the hospital. We sat in the waiting room, and I maintained my performance as the worried wife. Hours later, a doctor came out, looking exhausted. "Mrs. Davenport, we were able to separate them. There's no permanent damage, but they have some severe skin irritation. They'll need this special ointment." I nodded, feigning relief, while my hand brushed against my purse where I had 2 tubes of extra-strength hot sauce. "Thank you, doctor," I said. "Can I see them?" He led me to the nurse's station, where they handed me 2 tubes of the prescribed cream. The nurse gave me a sympathetic look. "Ma'am, I am so sorry you're going through this." I gave her a weak smile, and the second she turned her back, I swapped the ointment tubes with the hot sauce. My hands were quick and steady. I had been planning this for days. I walked into their hospital room. "Richard, Chloe, are you all right?" Chloe was curled up in her bed, her face red and blotchy, unable to look at me. Richard, still pale, started to say, "Margaret, I can explain." But I cut him off. I placed a tube of ointment on each of their bedside tables and walked out. A moment later, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the room. Chloe was shrieking, "It burns! My skin is on fire!" Richard was roaring in pain. "What is this? Who did this?" The whole floor was in an uproar. Other patients poked their heads out of their rooms. I heard an old man whisper to his wife, "It's them, the ones from the video online this morning." The doctor and nurses rushed into the room to try and help, but the damage was done. Their humiliation was now legendary. Mrs. Gable's video had gone viral in our community. I was standing in the hallway when Michael arrived with a folder in his hand. I had called him on the way to the hospital and told him where to find the envelope of evidence and the divorce papers I had drawn up. He handed me the folder without a word. I walked back into the room and placed the papers on Richard's bed. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice cold as ice. 40 years of marriage are over. Sign these. Then you can do whatever you want, as long as you stay out of my life and my son's life forever. Chloe started sobbing, looking at Michael, who had followed me in. "Michael, baby, please forgive me. I made a mistake." But Michael just stared at her with dead eyes and walked out without a word. Richard reached for my hand. "Margaret, please, listen." I pulled away. "Don't say another word, Richard. You made your choice." He started yelling my name, but a nurse came in and told him to be quiet. I turned and walked away without looking back. I found Michael leaning against the wall in the hallway, his head in his hands. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why Dad? Why her?" I didn't have any answers. I just wrapped my arms around him and held him tight, sharing his pain. I knew in that moment that Richard and Chloe had lost everything, but Michael and I had lost our family too. I just hoped that one day we could find our way back to peace. A few weeks after the whole scandal, my bookstores were busier than ever. The little bell above the door was constantly ringing. Customers came in not just to buy books, but to offer their support. "Margaret, you are such a strong woman," Mrs. Gable said, buying a stack of novels. "The whole town is behind you." I smiled and thanked her. They called me strong, but only I knew that my strength was forged in the fire of a broken heart. Every time I looked at the shelves filled with books, I remembered Richard and Chloe and their plan to take it all away. And I was still here. My son, Michael, moved in with me after that day. He didn't say much about what happened, but I could see the change in him. The easy laughter was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep sadness. "Mom, I'm just going to stay here for a while," he'd said, his suitcase in his hand. "I'll help you with the stores, whatever you need." I just hugged him. I knew he needed time to heal, and so did I. We started working together every day. He handled the business side of things, and I curated the books. "Mom, the Grand Hotel wants to double their order for the lobby library." He'd call out from the office, his voice steady. "Great," I'd reply. "Confirm the order." Those simple moments were a balm to my soul. There were no more lies, no more secrets. It was just me and my son, taking care of what was ours. Our dinners were quiet. We'd eat simple meals in the kitchen. "Mom, can you make that apple pie this weekend?" he asked one night, a faint smile on his face, the first I'd seen in weeks. "Of course," I said, my heart feeling a little lighter. "But you have to help me with the crust." He nodded, and in that moment, I felt like we were going to be okay. I started taking time for myself, something I hadn't done in 40 years. I joined a gardening club. I started taking long walks in the park. Sometimes Mrs. Gable would join me. "You know, Margaret," she said one day, "people are still talking about it, but they're not laughing anymore. They're just in awe of you." I just smiled. I had won, I suppose. But the price had been my family. Michael started to heal too. He began talking about his work again. "We had a big fire at the old mill yesterday," he told me over dinner. "It was a close call, Mom." I listened, my heart swelling with pride. "Just be careful," I said. "You're all I have." He looked at me with so much love in his eyes. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." Those words were the best medicine. They restored my faith that even after losing so much, I still had my son. One afternoon, I was sitting at the front counter of the main store, watching the people go by. The bell on the door chimed. The smell of old books filled the air. I looked at my beautiful store, the life I had built with my own 2 hands. Richard and Chloe had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. I still had my business. I still had my son. And most importantly, I still had myself. Thank you for listening to my story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. I tell a new story every single day, so if you want to hear what happens next in my little world, be sure to follow along and click that little bell so you don't miss tomorrow's tale. On the screen now, you can see 2 more stories that I think you'll find just as surprising. There's always something new on my channel. I'll see you in the next story. Much love to you all.